Okay, we're now on.
Okay.
I said
So-
I zoomed in and everything.
Before we left last time, I gave you some handouts about listening skills, and we didn't have a chance to really talk about those, but just reviewing, what I had said last week was that during dinner, you're sort of doing a combination of pastoral and social, but if you want to continue sort of the pastoral effect that we talked about, creating an empathic connection with people based on our shared humanity, then you want to try to keep the participants doing most of the talking. And your acronym, WAIT, I think it was very helpful. What am I saying and why am I saying it? What you say, you want to say, if you can say something that intentionally helps the person to talk more, you're giving them an additional gift. They have very few opportunities, I'm sure, where people really want to hear what they have to say. So one of the handouts I gave you gives a list between the difference between a social visit and a pastoral visit. Do you have those? Just, you have enough even just to look together. Just look over those briefly and just see if there's anything about the distinctions that are made that either surprise you or challenge you or that you might not have expected. Just review this briefly. Is there anything in that list that surprises you or challenges you?
Maybe one of the challenges is since you're accepting both the positive and negative.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, however, I find that the conversation at dinner, you can get too accepting of negative, and it becomes too much of a complaining session.
Yeah.
I don't know. That to me is one of the risks there, is that
So this is
that
where
you're kind of reinforcing their poor beingness rather than their, where they're getting out of it.
this is where my Ignatian training comes in. I'm a big believer in the concept of discernment. We are constantly trying to judge, not just here, but all in life, how to balance out, what would be the appropriate thing to do in the moment. Remember when we were talking last time about that concept of core mentality? People have come from a perspective of a scarcity mentality or an abundance mentality. And over time, what we're hoping to do is to nudge people from a perspective of scarcity towards a perspective of abundance. Because it's very easy to get stuck in that negative scarcity, because it may be in your face all the time. The things that are bothering you are always there. One way that I have found helpful, when I'm talking to patients in the hospital, and they can get very caught up in their medical conditions, and so it's like you listen to the point where you feel like they have fully express themselves and that you've been able to affirm what you hear. But if it starts to sound repetitive, one way that I have found that's helpful is to say something like, what helps you to get through this? Or what has helped you in the past? And so you're not just saying, oh, get over it, or, can't you think about the positive? But you're sort of redirecting in a gentle way what might have been helpful that kind of gets them thinking about something, more towards the abundance. Now, sometimes you have people that will say, nothing helps me, and so often what I would say to them in a hospital setting is, well, it sounds like that's your challenge right now. I can hear your anger and your frustration. It sounds like the challenge is, what would help you to get through this so you don't feel so awful all the time? Yeah, but I think, that's a constant balancing. In our Catholic tradition, we always talk about both and. Rarely is something either or, because we're talking about a mystery of God who is both timeless but has become time-bound in the incarnation. And our lives, are often this balance between the practical, the expansive, that we're always dealing in sort of a creative tension between different aspects of our lives. The human sort of time-bound, limited perspective, and the transcendent, which is expansive, possibilities, mystery. And so we're always, every aspect of our lives trying to negotiate this. So this is, just part of our human living, and part of the pastoral challenge is practicing that discernment of when to focus on this, when to focus on that. But that is a very real problem, that if you spend too much time letting people vent, it's not helpful to them.
And sometimes mine, I can hear in the opposite direction. I'm always starting with my 3 good things. The positive, how do I allow the space for the challenges to come up as well?
Right. Yeah. And this is a little complex for you too, because in the context of the dinners, there's a social element to it. Some of them may just feel like, I shared, I just want to chit-chat now. Often, the pastoral comes out of the social. So now, my one night here, sitting talking to one of the men, how are things going, and started to talk about his daughter. So that, I encouraged him, tell me a little more. And it got into a conversation about how significant it was, what was happening to her. She was graduating from college. And this is, the man who was reintegrating after 22 years. And she was 9 months old when he went to prison, and now she's graduating from college. And so instinctively, I kind of switched to pastoral, what's that like for you? Oh, he's so proud of her, And so, it's like when conversations take a turn where there's a pastoral opportunity, you may want to go there, just giving the person the space to speak if they want to. But that awareness of the difference between the pastoral and social can be helpful to you just in recognizing opportunities. Or they may not want to go there, but if you're aware, then you have the opportunity to give them a chance to go deeper if they want to.
I shared this with a few people last week. There was this man, Anthony, who hasn't shared a lot in groups, and I went up over dinner, and there were just 2 people there, and he asked me something about what I did for work, and I mentioned something about bullying in schools. And he said, well, I was bullied when I was in kindergarten. And he said, and my father told me when I went home crying, my father said, you go back up and beat up that kid, because I don't want you to be seen as weak. He said, so so I went back and I beat up this kid, and this kid was crying, and I said, well, what do you think about that advice your father gave you? And he said, I think it was okay because he didn't want me to be hurt and vulnerable. He said, but when I think about it now though, my first incarceration was for beating a guy up into a coma. And he said, so I think it actually was for help, he actually said to me. And it was just this moment that was like, just at the table, over the conversation, making that connection between messages father gave him in kindergarten and his first incarceration and what he had done. It was like, it was just a moment there,
That's good. Yeah. So he felt wonderful because he felt comfortable to say that to you, and you gave him the space to say it. And you just don't know when or these are going to come up. Great. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and when this group was set up originally, the model we had from a previous group set up in Cambridge was the meeting came first and then the group came. And Tom said, no, I think it's better the other way around.
What do you mean? It was the social came before? Or
Yeah. The social came first and then the group. And Tom had the idea that it actually would work better if the group came first and then the social part. That people might follow up from, have reached some kind of reflection during the group, whether they shared it or not, that they might be able to share more at the meal as they sat around. I mean, like you were saying with Anthony. Anthony probably maybe said nothing at all in group. I think he didn't actually say anything in group that particular day. And yet there, this significant thing came out, in the tea period afterwards.
Great. I'm a big believer in what I call percolation time. Often, we hear something and it takes a little while, sometimes even subconscious processing before we're ready and able and willing to share. And we provide that opportunity. We're helping in God's mission of bringing everybody to the fullness of their humanity. So everything that I suggest here is invitational. It's awareness and invitational. So if you do get into a conversation, okay, and be it at dinner or during the welcome time, the other handouts that I gave you talk about communication skills that support sort of the caring listening, the caring presence, and the empathic connection. So we talked about your nonverbal communication, how important that can be, and that continues even at dinner to be important. That you're not, looking at your watch, your cell phone, or somebody's talking, that you really focus in on what they're saying. When you're engaging in conversation, one of the best ways of encouraging them to talk is asking open-ended questions. So some places they refer to this as door openers. And they tend to be the who, what, where, when, and why, and how questions, as opposed to yes, no questions. How was your day going? How was that for you? What was that like? That gives them the opportunity that they can pick and choose what and how they want to share. And it invites them to say more. Whereas a yes-no question, that's not that they're bad, and your conversation may be interspersed, but the door opener questions are very good to use if you're trying to encourage them to say more. So I think at one point I said to this man, what was that like for you to be locked up, when your daughter was having significant events in your life? And so that gave him space to say what he felt like saying. I didn't box him in or, sort of do the leading question, but just gave him the space. And hopefully, he was able to say what he needed to say. So, often in dealing with people who might be uncomfortable with feeling questions or not used to talking that way, often if I'm trying to get a sense of what they might be feeling about something, I'll say to them, what was that like for you? Which leads them towards the experiential rather than the intellectual, but doesn't scare them off with, how did that feel? If there's a person that they're kind of guarded about their feelings or they don't know the words to use, what was that like for you can often lead them gently into sort of exploring feeling and meaning and what's behind the events. And just inviting you, can you tell me more? I'd like to hear more about
It's like when I asked the guy, how do you feel about the way your father responded? It was, because I always had my own reaction to it, but it was sort of, that allowed him to have his experience of it.
Yes.
As
Yes.
opposed to, and it invited him to go deeper.
Absolutely.
At that moment.
So this is a very good point to bring up too, is when you're talking with people, is to be aware of your own reactions and your own bias. If somebody says something that really touches a button, either in your own life or something that you feel very strongly about, good to be aware of that. But do you necessarily want to say it? You want to encourage the person to express themselves. And so asking, you didn't just pass over it, say, oh gee, that's too bad, that you were bullied. You encouraged him. You had your feelings about what kind of advice that was, but you encouraged him to express himself about it. Yeah. So being aware of your own biases, feelings, reactions is really important to helping you keep your goal on letting the other person talk. And then if it really touches something, make sure you've got someone that you can vent to after and say, I can't believe what happened to this girl, whatever, You're a way to have your own needs met. And also active silence. Okay. Sometimes you ask a question and it may take someone some time to collect their thoughts or to, maybe they never thought about it. Right? So it doesn't mean that you ask the wrong thing. Just give them a few minutes, and if they don't want to discuss it, that's fine. But don't be too quick to jump in. And I'm still, very struck, Rosie, about your example last week of a man who was sitting off by himself and how you went over and just sat with him, and just that companionable silence between you encouraged him to talk. It was a really good use of silence and presence. So, assuming that they do talk, then what are some of the techniques that sort of help enhance that experience for the person? And of course, we have some who, they start and it's hard even to get them to stop. One of the most helpful things for what you're doing here is the handout that I gave you that says reflecting skills. It's a two-sided handout that looks like this, and it says reflecting skills. And what this is after somebody has said something and you want to respond. When we don't know what to say, one of the easiest things to do is start talking about ourselves, Well, I understand what you're saying because when I, A very helpful thing is to reflect back to the person what you've heard them say. You're communicating to them, first of all, that what they said was important, that you were listening, And it also gives them a chance either to say more or to correct you if you didn't understand correctly. So again, as they're listening to you then and maybe responding, it's giving them a chance to process more, either more broadly or more deeply. So there are just some guidelines here, and I won't go through every one of them, but just things that are helpful to do or not helpful to do. So, paraphrasing or summarizing, what I hear you saying is, or it sounds to me like, rather than assuming that you know what they're saying, making some statement that assumes boy, that was really horrible.
Why do you think they have this in the "you should not" column, beginning a paraphrase with "I hear you saying"?
I think there, it was not putting the focus on you, but
But that one, you feel like that's a
Yeah.
little board-like.
Yeah.
What I hear you saying is,
right.
you're sort of checking out.
Again, the awareness of, if you start with "I hear you saying" and you give a recitation or a statement that really reflects what you think and not what the person thinks. But yeah, the goal is keeping the focus on the other person. So if you're saying, what I hear you saying is, and the person says, he's making an effort, he's really listened to what I have to say, then your goal is.
As opposed to just an opportunity to say what I think.
Right. That's what we're.
It's a good distinction.
Right. Or just as it says, I hear you. When that's rote, that's just sort of, I hear you. You can say, I hear you, and it communicates, I really have, tell, that this really meant a lot to you. Empathizing, an empathetic response can, boy, that must have been really difficult for you. That says the same as I hear you, and encourages them maybe to say more and say, or that must have been wonderful for you. So reflecting skills are particularly helpful in the kind of work that you're doing here during the dinners. You're letting them talk, but when they stop talking, you're not just sort of swapping stories back and forth, this is what happened to me, or that you're making a conscious effort to keep the focus on them for as long as they're willing to talk. They may, that may be enough. And maybe it's appropriate to say something about your own experience. Again, the weight. When you say something about yourself, why am I saying this? Is it going to help the person and create more empathy, or is it going to put the focus on me? So I would encourage you, to look over these reflecting skills, and you may look and you may say, oh yeah, I do this all the time, but it's good to be aware. Some of these, the things you should not do are sort of very extreme to make the point, minimizing feelings, like you're getting too emotional, don't get so upset. Cool down. These are very important when we do classes for the people visiting the sick and homebound, who in many cases have never had experience doing this kind of thing before. I think this is helpful, but it really isn't. So I would look these over and just either reinforce or be aware, or there may be some things that you say, yeah, I really could make some changes. And I think even for those of us who are experienced, the mistake that we often make is when we don't know what to say, we start talking about ourselves, or we start making an intellectual statement. Does that make sense? Questions or concerns about that? So I think in the prayer from last week, on the back of that, I gave you a handout that just showed the characteristics of a good listener. And again, these are things just for you to go over. Most of you, I think, because of having been involved in this ministry for so long, already do them, but they're the things that we've talked about nonverbal communication, putting your full attention on the person that you're talking to, and open-ended questions, and using your reflecting and summarizing skills. Do you see opportunities for doing this during the dinners? The times you can see when you have done them? This is just, again, awareness. It increases your opportunities for doing something pastorally helpful to the men even during dinner. Then there is a handout and which I put this. It says barriers to communication. It's on the back of that page.
So
Thank you.
the one that you were just talking about, that on the back of the prayer.
The characteristics of a good listener.
Oh,
Didn't I
oh,
put
that-
that on the back?
Oh, here it is. Oh, okay. It's on the back of, it's actually on the back of barriers to communication.
Okay, thank you, because I know I was trying to
Okay, cool.
save paper, so I
Okay,
did
okay.
double-sided even when they weren't necessarily connected. All right, so the barriers to communication, and again, this is awareness. I'm not saying people do this, but we can do it sometimes without realizing it. Getting distracted, somebody's talking and we're looking at somebody at the other table, or somebody that's walking in or out. Selective listening, that can somebody's going on and on. It can get challenging or somebody's talking and somebody comes and says, does anybody want more of thus and such? Doing whatever you can to keep your focus on the person who's talking and listening, but without thinking about how am I going to respond, not preparing an answer. This can challenge your sense of, can you trust that the Holy Spirit is involved in this? If you're doing something pastoral, you are collaborating with God in God's saving work. And so if you listen fully, Holy Spirit is going to help you to say or do something that's going to be worthwhile for the participant. So preparing, don't be too focused on I have to prepare an answer.
One of the challenges I find is every so often, one of the guys will, express, what I would regard as a prejudice. But basically, it's what's current, in prison, which is that, there's a pecking order. And at the bottom of the pecking order are sex offenders, who are all lumped together as all predators and children. And so you get guys, and I mean, it's happened to me several times at dinner here, where people will say, what they would want to do to the sexual predators. And, given my, that's such a prejudicial approach, I'm not, despite any thinking I've done before, I don't feel like I know how to respond to something like that.
Thank you for bringing that up. Anytime somebody says something that you really disagree with, how do you respond pastorally? Right, so first of all, it's good that you're aware that this really bothers me and it challenges me. So what might be a pastoral response? Given that example, somebody describes to you what they would like to do to a sex offender. You've heard the words. Remember, pastorally, what's behind the words? respond to with integrity.
Everyone deserves dignity and respect.
That's a statement, okay, expressing your,
Why do you feel that?
that's, responding with a question would be definitely preferable. Why do you say that?
I'd be afraid of their answer.
Be afraid of
Hey, you were
that?
about to say something.
Oh, similar to what Rosie said, but I was going to say, why do you think so many men in prison feel this way? To sort of generalize it.
Yeah, you could do that, or even if you want to focus on them and what they've said, it sounds like you feel very strongly about that.
Well, of course I do.
Right, tell me about it. Why do you feel so strongly?
A lot of guys, I feel like the unfortunate pervasiveness of like molestation can strike anyone. And I think that they might be prejudiced more because people close to them have. Like, imagine, Michael, if like someone close to you was, I would, like, I know how I would feel. Because I probably would feel the same way, unfortunately. Like, my bias and my personal experiences would probably like lead me to wanting, like, feeling this way, regardless of how much like God's spirit is. Like the pecking order, like the way we perceive sexual offending things is like society portrays it a lot worse. And so for them, it's like the way society perceives it, as in addition to like the men or the women that are in their lives that may have been affected by it. And those things, I think, are a lot more challenging for us to wrap our heads around, as opposed to like drug offenses or assault or something like that. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, this is very good, because if you allow them to talk about that and you go at it with an attitude of curiosity, why is this so? You allow them to express and maybe uncover why they feel so strongly about it. They have been abused. They know people who have been abused. It feels, very random. People can get away with it. There could be all kinds of reasons. When you respond to their feelings, you can usually do that with integrity. Because remember, the feelings are neutral. It's what they do that. So you're not responding that it's okay to beat up or whatever they want to do to the sex offender, but you're responding to the strong feeling and then listening and allowing them to process. See, because again, I mean to say that what you would respond is wrong. Everybody deserves dignity, absolutely. Somebody who's talking and is feeling very strong about that could come back and say, that guy's a monster, he's not human, he doesn't deserve dignity or whatever. But by responding to what you hear him, the feeling with which he's saying it, it allows him then to uncover and to process why he feels so strongly about that. So that's often, because
I think I'm probably a bit daunted by the task in the sense that I feel like that kind of prejudice is so deep-rooted that by just saying, encouraging the person to express more what their anger is about, will probably make so little progress that it might not get us anywhere further.
no, it might not.
Yeah.
But the question, go ahead.
Yeah, a why question though, I like to think maybe a little naively, they might think about it further.
Yeah.
When they're
It's true, yeah.
not there with
It
you.
might plant a seed, that they may be reacting and not even have gotten to the point where they can articulate why they feel so strongly. They're just reacting. And that question might encourage them at some point to think about, why does this upset me so much?
That's a good point. I was going to say it's a good point because within that social structure, the prison system, it's basically scapegoating.
Uh-huh.
It's totally scapegoating, and people want to feel better than somebody else, particularly the downtrodden.
Mhm.
So that's really where a lot of this is coming from. There's really not a basis to it.
Yeah.
So if somebody can come to that, that could be really some movement.
So I was going to suggest a possible question, because a lot of guys, I don't know, I'm sure there's some, but I've never encountered a man who came out of prison without that prejudice. So to ask, sometimes it might be appropriate to say, well, how did you feel about this subject before you went to prison? And to start the conversation. And maybe if they were abused themselves or had family members abused, then there might not be a big difference. But for a lot of guys, it's a required prejudice.
It was a good example. I kind of wish I had this conversation when I heard this moment, but it was one man who had mentioned that his son was molested, and he had seemed to have, it seemed like, he didn't say this, but it seemed to me that he did his 20 plus years in prison due to that he must have beaten this guy, either killed him or hurt him very badly. Because he had said something about his child being molested, and then later on said, I have no patience for people who abuse children. So you have this guy who seemed like he had this very direct experience with it, and then another person, I believe it was Terrell actually, who said, yeah, I agree with that, I've got no patience for that either. So it seemed like there was this first-hand experience, and then also this just like learned experience of, I'm going to learn that prejudice and accept it just because. So like for that one person, I feel like it's a good question to say like, well, why is there that? But for this one person, you have the answer. Why? And like, is that the can that you want to open? I feel like you're just setting yourself up for failure. If you're like, why do you feel that way? He just told you. You're like,
Well, it's a judgment, so he's told you. Go ahead, Rosie, he's told you.
I think if they said, Michael, for example, said to me, well, why do you feel this way about molestation? And I were to come back and say, well, I was abused, I was molested. And you would say, like, the kind of response that you could give to that is, I am so sorry.
Yeah.
That is completely unacceptable. So I think, I'm sorry for what that did for you. I'm sorry for the traumatic experience that caused. I'm sorry. Like, I can't make it better, but I will sit with you in this really shitty moment while you're like processing it again, because when guys come out and say that, or when someone else comes out and says it, I think that it's re-triggering. And so you might like being able to say, I'm like really sorry that happened. Like, yes, you're opening a can of worms, but like you might be the person that gets them like you're providing comfort, and the more times like someone who's experienced that can like sit with that and like be able to tell their story is really important too.
Yeah.
That's a very good response.
There's another piece to that too, and that's that we learn from being with these gentlemen who have served time that there's so much they cannot talk about in prison. There's very little they can talk about, so much that they cannot. And the reason they cannot is because that'll be held against them in some fashion, either by other prison inmates or by part of the personnel running the prison. So I think that frequently they haven't got a choice. They have to take that position, that they absolutely hate child molesters, because if they don't, they've targeted themselves as someone who be of use in some fashion for their position on that. So sometimes that's really where it happens.
So you may be providing a safe space for them to say it.
Yes.
Without being targeted. So in these cases, and I appreciate the concerns about, it could be opening a can of worms. Probably the best sort of first line of response would be to respond to the feelings that you hear. It sounds like that you feel really strongly about this. Or if somebody tells you specifically what happened, like Rosie said, I'm so sorry, that must have been awful for you. So you make an affirming response, which gives them the opportunity either to say more or not, or just to sort of, basically indicate, thank you for being understanding. Whereas if you ask a question right away, it may or may not be the thing they want to hear, but responding with that summarizing or reflecting back to the feeling that you hear is often a very good first response. And then see what happens if they start talking or they don't. And that can help you no matter what they say that you don't agree with. I guess this happens to us in the hospital setting all the time. People say things about all kinds of stuff, the doctors, the nurses, faith, politics, everything, and things that just, set your teeth on edge. But if you can respond to the feeling that's helpful to them, you can do it with integrity. And sometimes just that response to the feeling is the beginning of either healing or a different perspective, being able to say something and not having it challenged.
It also kind of related to what Rob was saying, gives the message that, there might be some other way to feel about this. Just by you saying, this is how you're feeling. And so often around this topic especially, there's the assumption that we all agree, these people are monsters and we all feel that way. It's sort of like what the norm is in the prison. So just by putting out, that might even give permission to feel like, oh, there might be another way to feel about this, that consensus is not necessarily reality, or maybe there really isn't even consensus around this.
And it's important to understand, we've had many sexual offenders in the group.
Exactly.
I know because if they talk to me about having been at the treatment center, like the young fellow recently, he reoffended while he was in the group, and I assume he's back in prison now, but that adds a whole new element to the conversation. There's an awareness that someone is in that situation. You might need to shift the conversation rather than the dinner might be a better time than.
How do people realize,
Yeah.
It's like anything that you're talking about, no idea who's among us. So we want to be very respectful and aware of that.
Well, I'm mindful of the time. This might be a good time to take a break.
Yeah.
So let's take a
Not meet yourself
10,
30
15
seconds.
minute break.
You've got 30 seconds to get to the meeting.
No, I'm going to do it right here.
Wow. Oh, wow.
Hi, Jack.
That gets old school. I took the bus.
Ah.
Boy, it's probably.
Oh, I remember when you pigeonholed me as a sex offender.
Okay. Glad we got that tape on tape.